7 era-defining battles, strategies, and tactics which changed the medieval world. From the mud-choked fields of Agincourt to the frozen lakes of the Teutonic Knights, and from the cunning deceptions of Black Prince to the tactical mastery that shattered the Mongol Empire. First in the list, the Archer's Mud Trap. At the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, the utilization of terrain wasn't just a defensive measure. It was a way to turn the English longbow into a weapon of mass destruction. This engagement perfectly encapsulates the classic underdog narrative, pitting a starving, disease-ridden English force against the pristine, elite heavy cavalry of the French nobility. The tactical brilliance of King Henry V lay in the perfect synergy between topography and the most feared weapon of the age, the English longbow. He positioned his army in a freshly ploughed agricultural field squeezed precisely between two dense, narrow forests. This created a massive physical funnel that prevented the French from outflanking the English, forcing their vast numerical superiority into a fatal, concentrated bottleneck. But the funnel was only half the trap. Henry's force was built on an unprecedented ratio of roughly 4 longbowmen for every single man-at-arms. To protect these archers from a cavalry charge that would normally shred them, Henry ordered the deployment of 6-foot wooden stakes. Sharpened at both ends and driven deep into the soil at a menacing angle, these stakes served as an impenetrable barrier that stopped charging horses dead in their tracks. Then, the environment took over. Torrential rain had turned the ploughed soil into a boggy, deep quagmire. As the French heavy cavalry launched their charge, the mud instantly sapped their momentum, causing massive horses to slip, fall, and trample the men trapped beneath them in the muck. This forced the French into a dense, immobile mass right in the middle of a pre-calculated kill zone. From the flanks, the English longbowmen didn't just fire. They created devastating, overlapping fields of crossfire that rained absolute destruction on the packed French ranks. In an aggressive and unconventional move, Henry even ordered his men to pull up their stakes and advance to provoke further French attacks, ensuring the enemy remained trapped in the lethal mud. To finish the job and prevent a rear-guard threat, Henry issued the historically shocking order to execute his prisoners of war. Agincourt wasn't won by a simple charge. It was won by the physics of mud, the lethal mechanics of stakes, and the unrelenting fire of the longbow. Henry's victory proved that when right weapon and terrain are perfectly synchronized, even a starving army can erase an empire's elite. Next, the frozen death trap. In 1242, the surface of Lake Peipus became the stage for one of history's most visually striking engagements, the Battle on the Ice. Prince Alexander Nevsky of Novgorod faced the heavily armed Teutonic Knights. Recognizing the overwhelming shock power of the Teutonic heavy cavalry, Nevsky refused to fight on solid ground. Instead, he executed a tactical withdrawal onto the frozen expanse of the lake itself. His Russian infantry were lightly armored and accustomed to winter warfare, making them mobile on the slippery terrain. The Teutonic Knights, however, were laden with heavy steel plate, chainmail, and barded warhorses. As they charged across the ice, they lost their primary advantages: mobility and coordination. The slick surface prevented them from gaining the traction needed for a devastating charge, turning their assault into a chaotic crawl. As the knights exhausted themselves trying to stay upright, Nevsky unleashed his reserve cavalry from the flanks to seal the trap. The retreat was a catastrophe. Historical accounts describe knights plunging to their deaths as the concentrated weight of their clustered armor cracked the weakened spring ice, swallowing both men and horses. This tactic used environmental attrition to turn the elite equipment of the Crusaders into a death sentence. The visual of armored knights falling through a frozen lake has become a staple of military history, proving that the weight of your armor is only an advantage if the ground can support it. Next in the list, Wagenburg, the medieval tanks. Moving into the 15th century, the Hussite Wars introduced a revolutionary mix of early gunpowder and defensive engineering. The focal point was the Wagenburg, or Wagon Fort, pioneered by the brilliant Czech commander Ain Jalut. Facing massive crusades from the Holy Roman Empire, the outnumbered Hussites lacked heavy cavalry. Jalutt's solution was to convert standard agricultural wagons into modular, armored, mobile fortresses. On the battlefield, these wagons were chained together wheel to form impenetrable squares or circles, completely nullifying the enemy's mobility. But these weren't just wooden walls, they were the centers of a sophisticated combined arms doctrine. Each wagon was a self-contained unit featuring crossbowmen, pikemen with halberds, and crucially, handgunners. These soldiers used early firearms called piszczala, which is the root of the modern word pistol. When enemy cavalry charged, they were met with devastating volleys from field cannons called hufnice, the origin of the howitzer, and concentrated handgun fire from the safety of the wagons. Once the shock of the gunpowder had broken the enemy charge and left them in disarray, the Hussites would unchain a section of the wagons and launch a fierce counterattack with infantry and light cavalry to rout the survivors. This tactic allowed a religious movement of commoners to survive multiple crusades against the combined might of Catholic Europe. This stands as a testament to the strategy. Ain Jalut, a general who lost his sight, remained undefeated, leading peasant armies against the Holy Roman Empire. Next in the list, anti-cavalry shock tactics, the butcher's Hoedendach. To understand how the supremacy of the mounted knight began to crumble, we must look to the Battle of the Golden Spurs in 1302. This engagement near the town of Courtrai represents the dawn of the infantry revolution, a period where common foot soldiers began to systematically defeat the aristocratic elite. The conflict pitted the French royal army, the peak of medieval military might, against a militia of Flemish tradesmen, including weavers, fullers, and butchers. Lacking traditional armor and horses, the Flemish developed a tactical doctrine around a specialized weapon, the Hoedendach. Translating to "good day," this was a thick wooden club topped with a steel ring and a lethal spike. It was engineered for a brutal dual purpose. The club's weight could cave in a knight's helmet or a horse's skull, while the spike could be grounded to receive a charge or thrust through a visor's weak points. The Flemish commanders chose a battlefield surrounded by the marshy Groninger stream, creating a deadly kill-box. Breaking the rules of chivalry, they fought under orders to take no prisoners, refusing to participate in the traditional ransom of wealthy knights. The French nobility, blinded by class arrogance, ignored their own infantry and charged their heavy cavalry directly into the marshes and the waiting Flemish ranks. The slaughter was absolute. The victorious peasants collected over 500 pairs of golden spurs from the dead French elite, hanging them in a local church as a glittering monument to their victory. This wasn't just a win. It was a visceral statement that disciplined, blue-collar workers with improvised spikes could butcher the most heavily armored aristocrats in Europe. The "good day" weapon remains one of history's most powerful symbols of tactical ingenuity overcoming social and military hierarchy. Next in the list, the feigned retreat. No discussion of pre-modern warfare is complete without the Mongol Empire, but their first decisive defeat at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 offers the most compelling tactical lesson. The Egyptian Mamluks, an elite caste of former slave soldiers, achieved the impossible by shattering the aura of Mongol invincibility. They did so by mastering the feigned retreat, a maneuver so dangerous that a single mistake could turn a fake withdrawal into a genuine panicked rout. Led by the commander Baibars, the Mamluk vanguard engaged the Mongols and then orchestrated a staged, controlled withdrawal. They were mimicking the exact tactic the Mongols had used to conquer Asia for decades. The Mongols, eager for a swift victory, pursued the Mamluks into the highlands of Palestine, funneling themselves into the valley of Ain Jalut. This led them directly into a trap set by Sultan Qutuz. The main Mamluk army was waiting in a concealed circular formation known as a ghazwa. The Mamluks used larger horses and thicker armor than the Mongols, allowing them to absorb the initial shock of the Mongol countercharge. Once the Mongols were bogged down in a close-quarters melee and lost their mobility advantage, Mamluk light cavalry launched relentless hit-and-run attacks from the flanks. They encircled and exhausted the invaders until the Mongol force was destroyed. This single victory saved the core of the Islamic world and potentially North Africa and southern Europe from total subjugation. It remains a masterclass in psychological warfare, using an enemy's own favorite tactic against them to achieve a world-altering outcome. Next in the list, the strategy of ruin, Chevauchée. We are conditioned to think of medieval warfare as glorious clashes of armored knights, but often the most devastating strategy was to avoid the enemy army entirely. The French called it the Chevauchée, which translates to a horse charge. Instead of getting bogged down in expensive, grinding sieges, a highly mobile, lightly armored cavalry force simply bypasses major fortresses. They plunge deep into the undefended heartland of enemy territory. They burn the wheat fields, destroy the vital windmills, and slaughter the livestock. The economy collapses, and with it, faith in the king. In 1355, the English commander Edward the Black Prince weaponized this strategy to perfection. He unleashed a devastating, large-scale chevauchée across the wealthy region of southern France. With a fast-moving force of Anglo-Gascon troops, he carved a 300-mile path of ash from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. He avoided walled cities and focused entirely on burning hundreds of prosperous, undefended villages. The consequence was catastrophic for the French crown. Their economy was crippled, and the political humiliation was absolute. Desperate to stop the bleeding and restore their reputation, the French were baited into a reckless, exhausted pursuit of the English forces. This blind rage culminated the following year at the Battle of Poitiers. Forced into a fight on English terms, the French army was crushed, and the King of France himself was taken prisoner. The Black Prince's Chevauchée is described by historians as the most important campaign of the 100 Years' War. But while economic ruin can cripple a nation in a single season, ensuring an empire survives for a millennium requires something much more structured. The Strategikon, institutional doctrine. Our final entry looks beyond single battles to the entire system of military survival utilized by the Byzantine Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire survived for a millennium because of its codified military doctrine, preserved in the 6th century manual known as the Strategikon. Unlike the fragmented feudal levies of the West, the Byzantines relied on complex logistics and flexible unit cohesion. They faced constant threats from heavy cavalry like the Avars and horse archers like the Huns. Their solution was the hollow square marching camp and mutual support infantry formation. Byzantine heavy infantry, the skoutatoi, were trained to form a massive shield wall. Contrary to Hollywood depictions, these weren't rigid locked walls. They used staggered stances, protecting half the soldier's body with their own shield and the other half with their neighbors. Behind them stood archers and soldiers armed with plumbatae, lethal, lead-weighted darts designed to pierce armor from above. The brilliance of this formation was its hollow center, which acted as a safe harbor for the Byzantine cavalry. From within this shell, the cavalry could quickly sally out through controlled gaps in the infantry line to launch counterattacks against disorganized enemies, then immediately retreat back into safety if they were threatened with encirclement. This forensic approach to doctrine provided the Byzantine military with incredible longevity and credibility. By dissecting the Strategikon, we see that the true secret to medieval victory wasn't just a lucky charge, but a professional, institutionalized approach to war. The medieval period was an era of profound tactical evolution, where the rules of war were constantly rewritten by those with the imagination to exploit them. Whether it was the mud of Agincourt, the wagon forts of the Hussites, or the hollow squares of the Byzantines, these tactics share a common theme: the mastery of discipline over raw power. They prove that success on the battlefield was rarely about who had the most knights, but who better understood the physics of the ground, the mechanics of their weapons, and the psychology of their opponent. These strategies didn't just win battles, they shifted the course of empires and permanently changed the way humanity thinks about conflict. If you enjoyed this deep dive into medieval strategy, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more forensic historical breakdowns. Which of these tactics do you think was the most brilliant or the most devious? Let us know in the comments below.